Saul Gone opens with various shots in the desert, taking us back to the brilliant episodes of Bagman and Bad Choice Road. Something you may notice about the episode as a whole is that it's not just a traditional series finale, but is also a look back through the show and celebrating how much it has achieved. Celebrating how much both shows have achieved. Presenting us with this iconic imagery is certainly fan service, but delivered in an excellent way because these flashbacks contain a lot of substance. This flashback takes place after the opening of Bad Choice Road. I know this because in the opening of that episode, Saul still has urine in his Davis and Maine bottle, whereas in the opening of Saul Gone, he comes across a stock tank and thus pours the urine away. The writing in this episode is already incredible. Saul and Mike proceed to have a conversation about a hypothetical time machine, and what point in history they would travel to. Mike making his decision with regrets in mind, and Saul making his decision whilst focusing on money.
First thing we do, take $6 million and build a time machine.
Where would you go first, huh?
December 8, 2001.
Why?
No. March 17th, 1984. Day I took my first bribe. You?
May 10, 1965. That's the day Warren Buffett took over at Berkshire Hathaway. I figure, got $1 million left from building the time machine, so I'd take my half and just stick it into Berkshire.
That's it, buddy?
What else?
Nothing you change.
The conversation of time machines in relation to regrets will be a common theme echoed throughout this episode. In this instance, it has been really interesting to see how these two speak to each other throughout their journey across the desert. They don't have too much of a friendship in Breaking Bad. They kept in contact because they can benefit each other's line of work. But in this context, they have been pushed to the limit. There has been a lot of shock, some mental breakdowns, many tense moments, and even a few surprises. So naturally, it follows they would be a lot more open in this type of setting. Mike clearly looks back at his days as a cop with a lot of guilt, especially because of the loss of Matty. Better Call Saul has done a superb job at fleshing out his character. The episode 5-0 is especially excellent at presenting the corrupt criminal world that Mike was involved in back in Philadelphia. Since moving to Albuquerque, he has taken on many jobs for the bad side, but at the end of the day, the work is still the same. Mike is still the same criminal no matter which side he works for, and this conversation is highlighting the regret with the path he chose. The money he is making in the criminal world is all going to his family, which on one hand, I've heard that one before.
What I do for my family.
There is part of Mike that simply enjoys this work. But on the other hand, he has declined money from Gus in the past as he felt guilty about the previous instance leading to a death of an innocent person.
And that good Samaritan?
Hector shot him in the face. We buried a guy out in the desert. Like I said, we cleaned it up.
Mike is often a selfishly motivated criminal, but he does still have a moral compass. He does not believe that anyone outside of the game deserves to die. And although he made a lot of money working for Gus, it is not the most important thing to him. Saul then of course only mentions money. But just like Mike, this series has done a superb job at fleshing out his character. And with this being the 63rd episode, we know at this point that he is much more complicated than the charismatic lawyer from Breaking Bad. And there is a human side to him.
If I had to do it all over again, I would maybe do some things differently. I just thought you should know that.
That you have regrets.
Yeah, I have regrets.
Even though he won't admit it here, he has many regrets and is motivated by more than just money. Saul has climbed quite far since that point and has made decent money with his career as a lawyer. But despite falling in with a bad crowd, he is not a completely selfish person. There may be part of him that's lost sight of what's important, but buried deep inside there is still a decent man who has what it takes to do something morally good. After the opening scene, we cut to the iconic intro, which has been designed for the latter episodes of the show. With each season, the openings have become progressively more corrupt, with an increasing emphasis on the black and white. A very creative way of slowly showing the series come full circle. So it's only appropriate that we jump back into the black and white world, except no Cinnabons will be baked this episode, as Miriam has found out the truth about Saul Goodman and the police have been alerted as a result. Saul speeds home, grabs what he needs, and then is on the run. He makes it to an alleyway, but the police cover it from both sides, so he proceeds to climb into the bin. Unfortunately, he does not have time to call for a new dust filter for his Hoover Max Extract Pressure Pro Model 60 as the police come knocking.
Anybody home?
Sooner or later, they're gonna catch up with you.
Saul is now in custody, and this is rather distressing for him. He clearly missed his mischievous past, but in returning to his roots, he has been caught again. Only this time his previous career as a criminal lawyer makes this situation even more serious. So desperate times cause for desperate measures. No more half measures, Saul. The lawyer Bill Oakley receives a call and is shocked by who it is. However, once he had finally processed what's happening, he does agree to be Saul's advisory counsel. And with that, the prosecutors go through a list of every crime this criminal lawyer has committed, arriving at the conclusion that Saul would need to be sentenced to life plus 190 years, but offer to make a deal that he serves 30 years. But at this moment, Saul is not very present. He then turns and asks the prosecutors if Agent Schrader's widow can enter the room. Now, if you were to tell me before the release of this episode that Marie Schrader would be in the finale of Better Call Saul, I would be rather confused. But much like every character that returned from Breaking Bad, her inclusion in Saul Gone is fantastic. And when you think about it, she is one of the most appropriate characters to be here. Marie is one of few characters from Breaking Bad who is both a victim and is still alive. Having her play a role in this episode is an effective through line between both shows. She was there to see all of the happy moments with her family, and had no clue of the drug empire that Walt had been building.
Skylar, you gotta tell me what's going on. So what's this about the kids not being safe? Safe from what?
From Walt and me.
Like what? Like your bad parents? Because you're not even close.
Marie.
There are things you just don't know. That if you knew, you'd never speak to me again.
In Felina, Skylar and Marie do speak to each other about Walt's return to Albuquerque. But it's fair to assume that ever since Marie found out, there has been a wedge between them and things won't quite be the same as they once were. Her life has been crushed because of Walter White's selfishness. Saul Goodman was a key player in that game, and so Marie's bitterness towards him is very understandable.
Hank and Steve, the good guys, they were shot dead and left in a hole in the desert. And you helped the two-faced, poisonous bastard behind it all.
Now, as always, Saul is up to no good here, and there was a reason he wanted Marie to come into this room.
The loss that you suffered, it's unspeakable. I met your husband a few times. You and he are victims. And so am I. 2 years ago, a man came into my office. He said his name was Mayhew. He wanted one of my clients to lie under oath. He offered me money. I declined. Any lawyer would. That night, as I was leaving my office, I was attacked. 2 men threw a sack over my head, they hogtied me, and they drove me out into the desert. And when they pulled the hood off, I was kneeling in front of an open grave with a gun pointed at my head. That was my introduction to Walter White. From that moment on, there hasn't been a minute that I wasn't afraid.
The story Saul tells is true to begin with, but after he was taken out into the desert, he knew full well what he was doing. He's spinning this and pretending that he's yet another victim, and doing so in front of Hank Schrader's widow, who lost so much. This is extremely unsympathetic. In a lot of ways, this scene is the inverse of the scene between Kim and Cheryl in the previous episode. Kim is very sympathetic towards Howard's widow and confesses everything by essentially handing her the script for season 6 of Better Call Saul, fully accepting any consequences that come her way. Hank Schrader and Howard Hamlin's deaths are somewhat similar as well. Neither death was personal, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The deaths themselves feeling rather abrupt with a bullet to the head. Their killers lacked empathy, and their bodies were buried in locations that were unknown, or locations that were unknown for some time. Howard's death was not directly Jimmy or Kim's fault, but as Cheryl points out, the pair actively ruined his life leading up to his death. On top of that, he wouldn't have been at their apartment in the first place if they had simply left him alone. Now it is fair to say that at one stage, Kim was just as bad as Jimmy.
Also, I agree, we are totally done with all that. Over and out. No more. Let's do it again.
But following Howard's death, she left everything behind, and did not take her share of the Sandpiper money because of what she would associate that money with. Saul, on the other hand, continued his work as a criminal lawyer and continued to get involved with bad people, leading to more deaths that indirectly involved him. The presentation of how these two dealt with these situations is very effective, and is yet another reason why the character writing in this series is impeccable. It is commonly debated amongst fans of the show as to who is worse between Jimmy and Kim. There are many references to point to for how one was a bad influence for the other, but sadly, they were bad for each other. The episode Fun and Games is very explicit about this idea.
We are bad for each other. I have had the time of my life with you. But we are bad for everyone around us. Other people suffer because of us. Apart, we're okay, but together, we're poison.
They loved each other, but a lot of that love was based on hurting other people, and convincing themselves that their actions were okay because they were in love and having so much fun together. And eventually, Kim came to the realization that this can't continue. The writers have made their point pretty clear. But the best writers do not just make their points and move on. The best writers will analyse this further. Fun and Games may be the last episode in the main Better Call Saul timeline, but there are still some stones left unturned. An obvious question is that if Kim disapproves of Saul and wants him to hand himself in, then why hasn't she done the same? The previous episode, Waterworks, brings up that question.
You should turn yourself in.
Why don't you turn yourself in? Seeing as how you're the one with the guilty conscience, huh? What is stopping you?
And in the same episode, this question is answered by having Kim confessing everything on the record and then visiting Cheryl. This is her genuine attempt to make things right. If she was selfishly motivated, she would have continued to keep quiet. After all, there is no physical evidence of any of this. This is all well written and is an excellent use of cause and effect. However, what elevates this is the subtle reflection of Saul and Kim's very different approaches to these similar situations. And it isn't just these situations they approach differently, but rather their lives in general. Kim tried to move on with her life, but clearly there was a lot of guilt that had been stored up over time. Jimmy, in a somewhat similar vein to Walter White, wanted to say screw you to everyone around him and prove he was the best by building his own business, making shitloads of money, and having the success he always desired.
This is a fresh start. This is how I move forward, and I like it.
Sorry. I just can't see it.
It's okay. You will.
What do you think? Pretty great, right?
Yeah, it's, Yep.
It is no coincidence that Fun and Games jumped straight from the breakup to the Saul Goodman we all know from Breaking Bad. This attitude he has towards Kim is even more supported by the fact that he re-entered the game after being frustrated with her on the phone. Although Kim is far from innocent, she at least eventually owned up to everything she did. Saul has twisted events in front of Marie and the lawyers. Although clever, it is a horrible thing to do.
And you think jurors are gonna buy that? One. All I need is one.
Following that scene, we see ongoing negotiations with the amount of takeaway food and drink, implying that they've been here for a very long time. Saul manages to narrow down his sentence to 7 years. He will get to serve this time at a more ideal location, and he even gets mint chocolate chip ice cream every Friday. But he decides to push it even further and tries to sell the Hamlin story to the prosecutors, before discovering that Kim already confessed everything.
He thought he really had something.
Sounds like you and your ex aren't talking on a regular basis.
Kim Wexler walked into the Albuquerque DA's office last month. She spilled her guts about Howard Hamlin. On the record.
Last chance. Do we go to trial or do we have a deal?
Yes. Yes, we have a deal.
We then have our second flashback, this time with Walter White and Saul Goodman waiting for their new identities and to be relocated. The conversation between these two will also be about time travel and regrets.
What would you do if you had a time machine?
Time travel. The kind of time travel that you're thinking of is a scientific impossibility. Stay in your lane.
It's just a thought experiment. There's got to be something you'd go back and change if you could.
There are a few occasions in Breaking Bad where you can tell that Saul just wanted to be friends with Walt. All he wants to do here is discuss a fun topic with him, but Walt is not so interested in engaging with it. Walter White could not have built his drug empire without Saul. And with all that time spent together, you'd imagine they'd be a lot closer. In their first episode of Breaking Bad together, Walt tries to threaten Saul, but then his coughing gets in the way and he seems a lot less intimidating.
Recognize your cough. Take that mask off, get some air. Go on.
And in their last episode of Breaking Bad together, Walt tries to threaten Saul, but then his coughing gets in the way and he seems a lot less intimidating.
It's over.
The connection, or lack thereof, between these two characters has always been the same. But Walt does eventually engage with the conversation and steers it in the same way that Mike does by opening up about regrets. Except his regret is more in line with Saul's mention of Warren Buffett. All about the money.
You are not talking about a time machine. You are talking about regrets. So if you want to ask about regrets...
Okay, regrets, then.
When I was a graduate student, I started a company with some... At the time, I thought they were my friends. Our goal was to commercialize discoveries that I had made. But little did I understand that they were artfully maneuvering me into leaving my own creation.
Is it successful?
Very.
When it comes to Walt and grey matter, it's a catch-22. Elliot and Gretchen were used as a scapegoat for the lack of success in Walt's life. But because of his pride and ego, he didn't accept a job at their company or the money they offered him for his treatment. He was hungry for that success but wanted to make it on his own terms and didn't want anyone else to receive the credit. This is something that becomes more apparent as he enters the meth cooking business. An example of this is him mocking Jesse's inferior product, but deep down knowing that he did a good job.
What in the hell is this? This is my product. This is my formula. This is mine. I am not going to lend my name to an inferior product. I mean, look at the diameters here. Their color is all cloudy, so you were struggling with distillation too. Now, this is very shoddy work, Pinkman. I'm actually embarrassed for you.
And an even more prevalent example is... well, I'll just let Mike explain it.
All of this, falling apart like this, is on you.
Wow. Why don't you walk me through this, Mike?
We had a good thing, you stupid son of a bitch. We had Fring. We had a lab. We had everything we needed. It all ran like clockwork.
Oh,
you could have shut your mouth, cooked, and made as much money as you ever needed. It was perfect. But no, you just had to blow it up. You and your pride and your ego. You just had to be the man. If you'd done your job, known your place, we'd all be fine right now.
His bitterness towards grey matter is one of the reasons he continued all of this.
I'm in the Empire business.
Towards the end, he was about to give up and hand himself in, until he heard Elliot and Gretchen's comments about him on Charlie Rose. The couple claiming that he did not contribute much to the company outside of the name of the company itself. Hearing these comments motivated him to finish what he felt he had to do, and so he went out with a bang. Originally, he worked out that he needed $737,000 for his family to be supported once he was gone. When he was over that amount, it became obvious that he was doing it for him. It is a tragic saga. Walter White seemed like a nice gentleman once upon a time, and although entering the meth business, it appeared that his intentions were pure. Over time, it was of course a selfish route for him, and many of his actions throughout the series were just to get back at those who wronged him. This flashback reminds us of that. Reminds us of why this madness spun out of control. With that being said, I also disagree with the idea that Walter White ruined everything. I believe the only thing Mike is wrong about in his rant is that they all had a good thing. Sure, Walter was a ticking time bomb, but so were all the other individuals in this game. And now with the benefit of hindsight, we know that before he even stepped foot in that lab, there were 2 bodies buried beneath it. Walter may have done some awful things, but there were plenty of awful things happening in this game when he was still teaching high school chemistry. All of this was going to come tumbling down eventually. This man just hit the accelerator. Anyway, let's get back on track. This time Saul does pick a regret of his, but the regret is when he once pulled a slip and fall and actually hurt himself.
A slip and fall? Yeah, that's how I put myself through bartending school.
So you were always like this?
I know what you were, what you are. People don't change. You're Slippin' Jimmy.
Slippin' Jimmy is very much like Saul Goodman, and Gene Takovic turned out to be the same. The lack of development over the years is exactly what's held him back. This episode is a strong reminder that through the main Better Call Saul timeline, the Breaking Bad saga, and the black and white world, this character has remained the same for far too long. And it's about time for that to change. We transition over to Saul on a plane being extradited to New Mexico.
She confessed. What's the DA gonna do with it?
Her problem's not the DA.
What then?
Well, apparently Kim took her sworn and notarized statement and hand-delivered it to Hamlin's widow.
Saul takes a moment to think about it, and then tells Bill that there is a lot more to the Hamlin case. This information is passed along, until it eventually reaches Kim through Suzanne Erickson.
He's giving testimony that affects you, personally.
And that brings us to the finale of the episode.
Stay. Face the music. You walk in with your head held high, you'll be the John Dillinger of the Metropolitan Detention Center. How bad is that?
There's a lot of great shots inside this courtroom presenting us with all the important characters in here, accompanied with the song All Things Are Possible by the Harmonizing Four. Both series have often used uplifting songs in quite serious scenes. The musical juxtaposition has been a technique used in many pieces of media before, and both series have excelled at utilizing it. For example, the prison killings montage in Breaking Bad feels even more horrific because of the happy tune behind it. And it also fits the narrative because 1 year prior, Walter White was extremely shaken up over taking a man's life. And now here he was waiting for the confirmation of these deaths and brushing it off as something that just had to be done. Walter White's lack of empathy here would not be communicated as effectively if the montage had a darker soundtrack behind it. Another strong example of this is at the very end of Face Off. Walter White has helped to successfully kill Gus Fring, and therefore the episode can be viewed as satisfying, depending on how you look at it. Because after Skylar finds out the news, she asks if Walter's behind it, to which he responds by stating that he's won. And Skylar has quite the horrified look on her face. In the 5th season, she ends up, understandably, being scared of Walt. To top this all off, the last shot in the episode reveals that Walt's plan relied on a child being poisoned. The song implies that a hopeful future lies ahead. And that is exactly what Walter White will be thinking. But the reality is that horrific things have happened to get to this point, and even more horrific things are on the horizon. In this courtroom scene we have guilty individuals, victims, and lawyers who are all taking this very seriously. Despite the positive music, this is not a positive situation.
It's showtime.
Shortly after the trial begins, Saul gets a moment to tell his side of events. He begins telling the story in the same way he told it to Marie, but with a twist.
2 years ago, a man came into my office. He said his name was Mayhew. He wanted one of my clients to lie for him under oath. He offered me money. I refused. That night, as I was leaving my office, I was attacked. A bag was shoved over my head. I was hogtied. I was driven out into the desert. And when they pulled the hood off, I was kneeling in front of an open grave with a gun pointed at my head. That was my introduction to Walter White. I was terrified, but not for long. That night, I saw opportunity. I shot it. Big money. And for the next 16 months, my every waking moment was spent building Walter White's drug empire.
Hold on, Mr. Goodman, stop right there. You are contradicting your plea agreement's sworn factual basis.
No offense, Your Honor, but I think I know the law here better than you do.
Saul is in complete control of this courtroom, as he has been in previous cases defending his clients. But it wasn't always like this. This was a slow evolution. Uno is of course the first episode in the series, and we see Jimmy not performing too well in court. He delays a lot of time in the bathroom whilst practicing what he's going to say. When he finally enters the courtroom, he gives them the old razzle-dazzle, but he is not very persuasive as his only real defense is that his clients are 19 years of age. Not a single word is spoken by anyone else in the courtroom, and I don't believe anyone needs to because the video evidence speaks for itself. Needless to say, this man has a long way to go before he sees any success as a lawyer. By season 3, his rivalry with Chuck has landed him in court, which will lead to some consequences. Now at this point, Jimmy was still his same old self, but he had managed to find more success and there has been a noticeable leap in his skills. Even so, he's going up against lawyers who have far more experience in this field than he does. Him and Kim do get pushed back a few times, but Jimmy of course has a few tricks up his sleeve, contacting Chuck's ex-wife Rebecca being one of them. But Chuck is able to cope okay with that. What catches him off guard though is the battery that Huel planted in his breast pocket. A battery that he felt no electrical current from. And now Jimmy has gained control of the courtroom and he doesn't need to say another word. Chuck cares very much about the law. And Jimmy does have some flaws that need to be addressed. But his tangent at the end of this episode confirms that this is much more of a personal way of getting back at his brother, mentioning many things that are unrelated to the case at hand.
He'll never change. He'll never change. Ever since he was 9, always the same. Couldn't keep his hands out of the cash drawer. But not our Jimmy. Couldn't be precious Jimmy. Stealing them blind. And he gets to be a lawyer? What a sick joke. I should have stopped him when I had the chance. And you have to stop him.
In order to get unsuspended and practice law again, Jimmy needs to sell the idea that he is regretful of his previous actions, that he cared a lot about his brother, and come across as 100% sincere in the process. This man was always pretty good at acting, but by this point he is truly exceptional. His way of storytelling and coming across as convincing has reached a new height, a talent that he continued to use.
I'll do everything in my power to be worthy of the name McGill.
They have to reinstate you.
Right?
They
Yeah,
just have
did
to.
you see those suckers? That one asshole was crying. He had actual tears. Jesus, Kim. You were right. It was all about Chuck. The whole time. It's all good, man.
Now that he is practicing under the name Saul Goodman, he is spectacular in court. In Namaste, he manages to make this store owner seem very confident of being able to identify the man who stole money from his cash register.
It's him. Now, would you be surprised to learn, Mr. Harkness, that the person you just pointed to is not the defendant?
What?
And my client is in the back of the courtroom. Mr. Seki, would you please stand up?
Objection.
This all results in a mistrial. His methods may not be approved of, but Saul is undeniably fantastic at his job. In Saul Gone, he managed to reduce his sentence down to 7 years. He lied to the government so that Kim would be present in the court, and even though the lawyers desperately wanted to take him down, they couldn't. This gradual evolution has made his final appearance in court, with his confession of the whole truth, even more impactful, because the only person who can take down Saul Goodman is Saul Goodman.
Continue.
I lied to the government about Kim Wexler. I just wanted her to come here today. I wanted her to hear this. So yeah, I wasn't there when the meth was cooked. I wasn't there when it was sold. I didn't witness any of the murders, but I damn well knew it was happening. I was more than a willing participant. I was indispensable. I kept Walter White out of jail. I laundered his money, I lied for him, I conspired with him, and I made millions. If he hadn't walked into my office that day, Walter White would have been dead or behind bars within a month. And Agent Schrader and Agent Gomez and a whole lot of other people would still be alive. Fact is, Walter White couldn't have done it without me.
Jimmy then moves on to talk about Howard Hamlin and Chuck McGill.
What happened to Howard Hamlin? I can't even. After that, Kim had the guts to start over. She left town. But I'm the one who ran away. And my brother Chuck, he was an incredible lawyer. He's the most brilliant guy I ever met, but he was limited. I could have tried harder. Instead, when I saw a chance to hurt him, I took it. I got his malpractice insurance canceled. I took away the one thing he lived for, the law. After that, he killed himself. And I'll live with that.
Mr. Goodman, sit down and stay seated.
The name's McGill. I'm James McGill.
The court scene wraps up with arguing amongst the lawyers, but Jimmy and Kim give each other a certain look. He put on the brilliant Saul Goodman act, beating all the lawyers in this room, but he still took accountability and went out on his own terms. We then have our third and final flashback, this one with Chuck. Somewhat like the opening of Breaking Bad's Ozymandias, this flashback presents us with a scene that feels familiar to the very first episode of the series, but with a slightly different context to it. It is fairly straightforward, but is yet another fantastic way of showing how much the series has achieved since the very beginning.
You know, I could hire someone to do this. I could get someone from the office.
I'm doing it.
Yeah, every day? While you're trying to start a practice? Why?
Because you're my brother. Duh.
Jimmy always had a human side to him, which is often what made his character very endearing. It was a shame to see him doing these bad things because we knew the good this character could do.
My brother is not a bad person. He has a good heart. It's just, he can't help himself. And everyone's left picking up the pieces.
The scene ends with a close-up of a book called The Time Machine, a book that was also featured in episodes 1 and 2 of this season. And with the conversation of time machines and regrets playing a major part in this episode, it has now been all wrapped up very nicely. The next scene takes place on a prison bus and Jimmy gets noticed by the other inmates. It may have been intimidating at first, but the inmates then start chanting "Better Call Saul." Despite now theoretically facing 86 years in prison, him being viewed as an absolute legend is certainly the silver lining here. Walter White entered a world of drugs and violence, and in the end, well, I guess he got what he deserved. Jesse Pinkman may have been in the game, but he was blackmailed into cooking meth with Walt.
You want to cook crystal meth?
That's right. Wow. Either that, or I turn you in.
On top of this, he felt tremendous guilt over his actions. From a legal perspective, he'd of course be locked up for many years, but as we the viewers saw the good side of Jesse, a lot will agree that he deserved a second chance at life. As long as he doesn't get involved with any more bad people, he is no threat to the world. And as for Saul Goodman, he continuously made the same mistakes and deserved to be held accountable for his actions. But he also deserves this status. It is a bittersweet ending and is possibly the most positive way this show could have logically concluded. When you zoom out and look at everyone involved in this saga, there are no winners. The lies, the deaths, the heartbreak, no one won. Even Jesse, who had the most hopeful ending, with a new shot at life, is the most traumatized character, and chances are said trauma will follow him his whole life.
Put things right. No. Sorry, kid, that's the one thing you could never do.
Jimmy's ending is appropriate because it's finally him coming to terms with the fact that he can't keep getting away with it. And that even when he was managing to get away, it didn't bring him any sense of fulfillment.
Our main goal for the season is one singular goal, to try to bring it to a satisfying conclusion that was honest.
Jimmy owning up to everything and accepting a much longer prison sentence is within his character. As we've seen countless times before, he felt a certain level of guilt over his actions. Even though he never killed anyone directly, his choices put him on a bad choice road and one that led to the deaths of many people. This madness should have ended a long time ago, and Jimmy accepting that accountability gives himself and many others the closure they need.
I like to think that as much pain as he's in, it's an opportunity to maybe make better choices would be neat. The opposite of Walter White.
He made the best decision in this situation. Plus, his new life is not all that bad. His prison job is pretty much the same as his job at Cinnabon. The biggest difference is that in prison, he is not living in fear. He no longer needs to hide or feel as guilty. He's serving his time. And with most of the show being about lawyers, the series concluding at a prison only feels appropriate. The episode ends with Kim visiting Jimmy and they have a smoke, reflecting the first episode. As Kim leaves the prison, the two look at each other and Jimmy gives the classic finger guns. A bittersweet end to the episode and a brilliant ending for the series. Doghouse, jumpin' Lalo, Albuquerque. Oh crap, I put on the wrong tape. Better Call Saul is my favourite TV series, and it's amazing how much it achieves. Especially considering that it was always going to be compared to the quality of Breaking Bad.
In a weird way, it's harder to follow a success than a failure. I should know this, I've had a lot of failures.
The fear you have going into it is, what if I screw it up? What if I do something that's so bad? What if we, working together through no intentional action on our parts, come up with something that sullies the memory of the mothership of the previous show?
On top of having the pressure of living up to Breaking Bad, it's crazy to think there was a point in time where people doubted even the idea of the show, asking why do we need a whole series about the funny lawyer?
Clearly his taste in women is the same as his taste in lawyers, only the very best, with just the right amount of dirty.
But this team is so talented they managed to prove these doubts wrong and made one of the best TV series of all time. But that's not to say the show hasn't received criticism. And one that I tend to spot is in regards to its pacing, with many claiming the series is too slow. I suppose it doesn't contain as much action as Breaking Bad, especially in those earlier seasons, But even looking at that first episode, a lot happens. We see Gene working at Cinnabon and watching the Better Call Saul commercials. We witness Jimmy failing to make a business as a lawyer. We have the first scam of the series. And the episode ends with Jimmy having a gun pointed at him by none other than Tuco Salamanca. I guess I would agree that the show is overall fairly slow paced, but I would argue that is only a positive, as these characters are very well fleshed out and the world around them is thoroughly explored. Plus, when we eventually reach those climactic episodes, it makes those payoffs incredibly satisfying. Looking at the main characters in both series, their first appearances are very different to their last. It is a long journey, but that time is not wasted.
When we started this series, I didn't have any idea how slowly the transformation would go from Jimmy to Saul. There was some real debate in the room, and I think we made the right choice of going slower rather than quicker. So we're taking our time and really seeing how this character becomes Saul.
We got a very close look into the life of Jimmy McGill. The man he ended up becoming now makes a lot of sense. But the transition from Jimmy to Saul was gradual. To begin with, he was often put down by his brother, and when he did actually land a good opportunity, he felt like he couldn't fit in. He was the underdog for a large part of this story, and accompanied with his charisma, it was very easy to root for him in those early stages. However, he didn't always make the best decisions, and I believe one of the biggest turning points was when he found his niche, selling drop phones to criminals. He then went on to use these clients to relaunch his career as a lawyer.
Doesn't that sound like you're encouraging these people to commit crimes?
They don't need encouragement, believe me.
I'm just worried about how this reflects on you.
Really, it was encouraging criminals. And after a certain point, he wasn't just helping them out in legal situations, but he was actively providing them with opportunities and making millions in the process.
I know a guy who knows a guy who knows another guy.
He didn't become a criminal lawyer, he became a criminal lawyer. Part of him has always been this way.
You're the kind of lawyer guilty people hire.
But it reached new heights when he became a friend of the cartel. Selling the phones put his name out there, but representing Lalo was a huge boost in his career. Managing to get Lalo out on bail for committing murder is insane to say the least.
Right? I know you got a million legal loopholes that we can dance through. Big bag of tricks. You know, any clever technicalities, huh? And reasonable doubt type stuff.
So this led to Saul gaining new criminal clients.
You're him? You're Saul?
Yeah.
Then you're the guy, right? What guy's that? Salamanca's guy.
His career is clearly something he gets a thrill out of, but it's also something that he's always worried and felt guilty about. Hence why the Saul Goodman persona works so well as a shield. It functions in the same way that it does for Walt and Heisenberg. It wasn't Jimmy that partook in those terrible things, it was Saul.
This guy killed a 22-year-old kid. It's wrong. You know it's wrong. And I think Jimmy does too.
Saul.
I'm sorry?
He practices now under the name Saul Goodman.
It is rare when a piece of media is able to both distinguish itself from the original but also be very faithful to it. People quite rightfully give this series a lot of praise for its continuity with Breaking Bad. I've touched on a few excellent examples in this analysis, but there are many more connections between both shows. There are also some subtle reflections. At the end of Breaking Bad Season 3, Mike is about to kill Walt and feels guilty about it. The issue though is that Walt is seen as too much of a liability because of his loyalty to Jesse. We now know this is not the first time Mike has been in this position, as he had to kill Werner Ziegler for also being a liability to Fring's operation. Only difference is that Walt managed to outplay Mike.
You might want to hold off.
Yeah? Why?
Because your boss is gonna need me.
Another reflection is when Walt shows up to Fring's house with the intention of killing him. However, he was not the first. Kim was in a similar position, she was just able to make it to the front door. There are also many characters that made a return. Even the pig toy did. I love this attention to detail. But I will say the praise from the audience isn't always stated in the correct way. Vince Gilligan, Peter Gould, and the rest of the writing team did not have all these pieces figured out in advance. Allow me to elaborate. The biggest example of a brilliant connection between both series is in the episode of Breaking Bad called Better Call Saul. This was our first time seeing this character, and when Walt and Jesse take him out into the desert, we get these lines.
Oh, no, 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 no! No, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, he's the one! Lalo didn't send you? No, Lalo? Who? Oh, thank God! Oh, Christ.
These lines didn't really mean anything when the episode came out in 2009, and it could have stayed ambiguous, but clearly a story was there. Just remember that once upon a time, the Clone Wars was just briefly mentioned in A New Hope, and look at what that ended up becoming. So we were introduced to Nacho Varga in 2015, Lalo Salamanca in 2018, and the story finally came full circle in 2022. And perfectly it was in an episode of Better Call Saul titled Breaking Bad.
No, it wasn't me, it was Ignacio, he's the one!
Viewers didn't know what this line meant in 2009, but Vince and Peter didn't really know either. The way Vince, Peter, and the writing team achieve these end results is by coming up with new ideas, and then going back and watching Breaking Bad to ensure that said ideas do not contradict anything.
Our trick is to go back and look at the characters and think about where their heads are at. So yeah, we're making it up as we go along. You make up all kinds of plans, you get all kinds of big ideas about where you're going, but you have to be ready to throw them out.
This attitude towards the writing may be more apparent when they had to keep the consistency between two different TV shows, but this has always been a good skill of theirs and one they used when writing Breaking Bad.
Once we had Mark Margolis in that part, which we didn't think we'd ever get that great an actor in that role, then we're like, God, we got to bring this guy back.
Yeah.
Tio, he's alive at the end of that episode. Let's bring him back in the next episode. And then, the guy is such a pleasure to work with. Let's bring him back anytime we can. Let's have him have some backstory with Gustavo Fring once we establish Gus. But little did we know in that first episode that he would be crucial to a bad guy who didn't even exist at that point, Gus Fring.
Right,
and then later on, the whole thing about, the bomb and the bell. We didn't know any of that. We looked backward constantly thinking, what can we use that will feel very organic and feel like we had it planned out all along?
This approach can apply to very simple things like Kim meeting Jesse and Kim being Combo's lawyer. There is nothing in Breaking Bad that would contradict either of those things, so therefore it can be included in Better Call Saul. Now let's look at a more significant example. There was obviously an idea for Mike to go on his own solo crusade against the Salamancas. This would then be a great way for him and Gus to work together as they are both motivated to take them down. Fring's plans are just a tad more sinister.
A bullet to the head would have been far too humane.
Again, nothing in Breaking Bad contradicts the idea of Mike having his own personal grievances with the Salamanca family. And so this excellent idea can be put into action. The writing team is incredibly talented, but this wasn't achieved by knowing everything from the very beginning. It was achieved by questioning everything and having consistent creative writing. Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad, and El Camino have all excelled with maintaining the continuity between them. But this team is so talented that even the quote-unquote retcons are actually really good and bolster the story. In Breaking Bad, Saul makes it very clear to Walter that his PI was able to track him down.
It should be much, much harder for people to track you down. My PI charged me for 3 hours, so I seriously doubt it took him more than one.
People could have guessed who Saul's PI was in retrospect, but we didn't definitively know who it was. But through the final season of Better Call Saul, it is confirmed that it was Mike who went out and gathered this information on Walter White.
What about that Heisenberg fella?
High school chemistry teacher.
You're shitting me, really?
Walter Hartwell White.
We always knew that Gus was reluctant to work with Walt, because despite his brilliant product, he felt that Walt and Jesse were not professional enough.
I don't think we're alike at all, Mr. White. You are not a cautious man at all. Your partner was late, and he was high.
but there is now an extra layer to this because Mike was able to gather this information very quickly, and came to the correct conclusion before anyone else, which he has been known for in the past.
Now listen, even if this guy was gonna live, I wouldn't go near him. He's a complete amateur.
Is that your appraisal, or is that what he who shall not be named says about him?
He didn't say anything. The guy's small potatoes.
Yeah, okay. I hear you. I got a feeling about this.
But I don't want to give all the praise to Better Call Saul, because El Camino does not receive enough of it. And what I just talked about is present in multiple scenes in that film. When Jesse thought he was about to begin his new life in Season 5 of Breaking Bad, it seems that choosing to move to Alaska was a spontaneous decision.
Want a suggestion? How about Florida?
Florida. Why there?
Alaska. Okay, well, that's a different vibe. I never figured you for a big moose lover, but whatever floats your boat. Alaska's good.
The opening scene of El Camino contains a conversation between Mike and Jesse. They are talking about where they would live if they could start over, and Mike says he would go to Alaska. This adds a lot more context to Jesse's decision because he looked up to Mike and trusted his judgments.
I'm not sure I should stick around town.
That's a start.
Nothing really keeping me here.
Where'd you go? If I were your age, starting fresh, Alaska. It's the last frontier. Up there, you could be anything you want.
And another good retcon is Jane elaborating on her philosophy about the universe.
You open yourself up and go with the flow wherever the universe takes you.
I really don't need to break this one down analytically. All I'll say is that I've never fully appreciated the cinematography of Alaska because I've always had tears in my eyes.
I think it's a cool philosophy.
I was being metaphorical. It's a terrible philosophy. I've gone where the universe takes me my whole life. It's better to make those decisions for yourself.
So Better Call Saul is very faithful to Breaking Bad. It is also an incredibly well written show in its own terms, but the presentation of it all is equally as brilliant. Every detail in this show is purposeful and often has a simple logic behind it. However, it is always presented in the most creative way. Even a small detail like Jimmy not being able to get the world's second best lawyer cup into the cup holder is symbolic of how he doesn't fit into a law firm that isn't his own. Him working at Davis & Maine was quite a struggle. He was a lot more enthusiastic, he approached things in very different ways, and they saw him as a liability. And the cup not fitting well within his company car, but fitting comfortably within the cup holder of his Suzuki Esteem, shows us that sometimes simpler is better, even if simpler is bright yellow with a red door. Having subtle dialogue to explore these ideas is an essential component. But as a film student will tell you, this is a visual medium. The more creative the show can get with its ideas, the better. All these ingredients combined together with a lot of care and attention to detail has resulted in something very special. The first time we saw this character was in an episode of Breaking Bad that Peter Gould wrote. I loved this character from the moment I saw him on screen, but there had to be more to him.
Breaking Bad fans really didn't see a lot of Saul Goodman. Most of what they saw with Saul Goodman was him working with Walt and Jesse. It raises a lot of interesting questions. How do you get the idea of becoming not just a lawyer, but a criminal lawyer?
Peter Gould created this character, and it was only appropriate for him to give the character a send-off in a superb finale. Saul Gone encompasses the brilliance of Better Call Saul.